I often hear and get feedback that branding is for big companies. Why a smaller NDIS provider would even consider brand as the first base.
9 out of 10 SIL providers, if you look them up, they all look the same, sound the same, talk the same. They are identical. You'd swear they were designed by the exact same person, every single one. If you really want to differentiate yourself, is to actually spend a little bit of time in deciding what your brand is. And a brand isn't a logo, it's not a font, it's not a color, it's not a name. And people are, to some extent, everyone's irrational, and people will always choose a more powerful why over a slightly better what anytime. Right. But what's great about it is that your why, which forms part of your brand, is that is actually one of the few ways you absolutely can compete with the massive bodies, the massive NDIS providers. Big companies spend a lot of money on branding for a reason. It's because they know that it works. Because to get 100 people to look at your website costs the same no matter how good your website is. But if your website's great and consistent and beautiful and it makes sense, then you're going to get better value from those 100 people. And in an industry and in a market where a lot of people with disabilities, they may not have the strongest form of literacy, having colours and logos, these things can be really powerful to people who aren't able to read because they can still identify, they know the colour.
What stage in a business should an NDIS provider be thinking about their brand?
Every SIL provider knows the challenges: compliance, rosters, claims. But what if you could work smarter, grow faster, and make a bigger impact? Welcome to SILosophy, where we have real conversations about what it takes to succeed in supported independent living. This podcast is powered by Tania Gomez Consulting and Resolve. Let's get into it.
And today we are joined by the wonderful Tommy Trout to talk about building a brand as a SIL provider. Thanks for joining us today, Tommy.
My pleasure, Tania Gomez. Always a pleasure.
And what's really special about having you on this podcast is that you are the one that came up with the name SILosophy.
Yes.
Yes, and so I've stolen that from you, and thank you very much.
My pleasure. It's an imitation to sincerest form of flattery, right? So.
Absolutely. I wish I could be just like you, Tommy.
Famously not, but yeah.
So I want to talk first about your new business, Disbranded, and the work that you're doing about branding. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Disbranded?
Look, in a nutshell, I think that branding in the NDIS sector sucks. I think branding in the broader disability sector sucks. And I wanted to do something about that. Didn't want to be the guy that complained about it constantly. Essentially, I've spent a lot of time. I'm an industry diehard, been working in it since I was like 17 years old. So, which is a number of years ago. And, what that means though is that I go to these expos and they're just really sad and depressing.
Yeah.
And, you look around and I'm like, if I was, I look through the lens of my brother he's on the spectrum, and, if Jack was here, he'd be so embarrassed that like how lame these businesses look. Some of them are awesome, but they just look really pathetic. And so I don't think it's good, for self-esteem building. I think it also communicates something to society, the way that we talk to people in our branding messages, and it sort of instructs everybody else on how to talk to them. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we just could actually really up the game of branding in this sector and make it fun, vibrant, fresh, interesting, disruptive, you know what I mean? And, a little bit chaotic, which is what you want. When I started my company, WeFlex, one of the first things I did was put a lot of money into branding because I really wanted to stand out and speak to people, especially young people with a disability, and make them proud and think that we were cool.
Yeah.
And I think we were, I can say that I think we're one of the few providers in Australia ever to actually sell merch to its own participants because they loved the brand and thought we were that cool, which for me is one of the coolest things they ever did there. Yeah. So that's essentially why I started it.
And Disbranded isn't like just every other digital agency or branding agency out there. You're actually looking to hire almost all of your staff are people with disability.
Yeah, so it's a tricky one with that because it's around inclusion and you have to be inclusive. So the rule is that we sort of said, look, we're completely inclusive, but it's actually quite indicative of my network these days that they just all happen to have disability or chronic illness or something, you know what I mean? So we are sort of really are looking to hire, or at least be incredibly biased towards hiring people with disability, as long as they obviously meet the standard. If they don't, then that's just tokenism, which we're not about. But, if you're a creative with a disability and, you have amazing talent and you want some more work, please feel free to reach out for sure.
And why did you decide? I know that you're saying that most of your network have a disability,
Yeah.
but is there another reason why you decided to hire people with disability?
Well, in some respects, your brand is going to be designed by someone who has one vested interest, one way or the other, in how you look. They're going to be a lot more passionate or interested in, this sector, which I think bodes well for design and for creative input and creative enthusiasm. And then, on top of that, you're communicating to people with a disability. And what better way to design from the get-go, from the very start, by being influenced and led by people with a disability.
And this business that you're running, Disbranded, you've also got Inclusive AF, and both of these are trading names of your larger company,
Yes.
which is in partnership with your brother.
Yes.
Do you want to talk to us a little bit about how all of that works?
Sure. So we chose that company name not thinking we'd have to talk about it publicly. But
That's why I didn't say it.
yeah, so it's called Trobro Industries, so Trout Brothers. And, after WeFlex, we took some time out, but we're both just really passionate and love creating new things, really. And we sort of love that sort of startup energy and game. And so we started Inclusive AF, but we also really wanted to do Disbranded, but I didn't want to run two companies. So one company, two business names, two businesses that are off and running. It's a really exciting time for us.
Yes, I'm very excited for you. So getting back to brand building as a SIL provider, SIL is just so competitive. There seems to be, I feel like there's a SIL home on every corner, that there seems to be definitely more SIL homes than there are participants, and it seems to be quite competitive. What do you think is the most effective way for SIL providers to differentiate themselves from others?
So obviously the branding guy is going to say develop a brand, but it really does help when it is so competitive. But I would argue that 9 out of 10 SIL providers, if you look them up, they all look the same, sound the same, talk the same. They are identical. You'd swear they were designed by the exact same person, every single one. And so I think if you really want to differentiate yourself, is to actually spend a little bit of time in deciding what your brand is. And a brand isn't a logo, it's not a font, it's not a color, it's not a name. It's a promise, it's a vision, it's a mission, it's values and principles, and it's a niche. And it's absolutely worth the investment. Good branding makes your marketing go a lot further, but also think about it from the lens of the decision maker. So if it's a mum who has to choose a SIL home for her child who has a significant disability, turning 18 or above or whatever, think about the amount of scrutiny they are going to put into the choice of SIL. And you've just got a half-assed website up there with no real language or branding or communication, and you think she's going to pick you out of the bunch because you're, quote, high quality. I don't think so. How much scrutiny would you put into it?
Yeah, I don't think I would use a SIL home.
But you would look at every single word, every single pay, everything they've ever done that you can find publicly, and you would absolutely form a lot of opinions about it. Because they're going through, it's a very complicated, emotional journey. And to not care about that and just be like, no, we're really good, trust us, give us your child and 200 grand.
Yeah.
I don't think that's it's if you want to differentiate, actually put some effort into that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because my children are young, so I have had to do that with childcare centres and nannies or au pairs or babysitters and trust people. And it's a very, very hard decision. And often I feel like actually nothing's going to meet my expectation, and therefore I'm just almost not going to participate. I'm going to let my husband do it, or I'm going to just really try and lower my expectations, because in childcare there's wait lists everywhere. We have to, when we moved back to Sydney from Perth, we just had to take the first spot that we got because we were told it was going to be an 8-month list. We need to get do we need to work? So I find that I lower my expectations. I'm an early childhood teacher. I trained adults in working in childcare centres for many years. So I know exactly how they should be or could be. And when I walk into a centre, I almost have to stop myself from red penning, the observation they hand me or the sign on the wall. Like, that is my environment, so I know what it should be like, and I find it very challenging. I have to almost walk in there with blinkers. And I've had this conversation with friends of mine who have children with disability who are now in their 20s, moving into either leaving school and making the choice of the day program they're going to go to, and they've had the same issues, that they've walked into day programs and they've seen Christmas movies playing in February or July or whatever it might be, and been like, well, hang on, my son has just gone from this amazing environment, why would I leave them here? And I guess leaving the home for the first time, going to live somewhere else. My children don't have a disability, but even I can imagine that journey. I'm going to be, wanting to be part of that with them and help them. Of course, wanting them to take that step, but it's a lot of emotions that you would be going through. And so I think that not talking to the fears of the mother, the father, the participant themselves, maybe the wife or the of the participant, depending what age they are, and their circumstance, I think that is a very big error. I think that is, your main audience obviously is the participant. You want them to be happy, but obviously there could be multiple other people in that situation you need to be talking to. And so I think it's really important that what you say to them is there. And I think you're right. Whenever I look at disability websites, when I'm auditing them, I'll have a look, and under services, we have the list of registration groups. And I know what they are as an auditor, but as a consumer, surely nobody understands what daily task shared livings means.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have businesses that they themselves wouldn't use if it wasn't their business.
Yeah, that's scary, isn't it?
It's a big problem. For me, I've had a lot of presentation jobs, and I've had them for really, I started when I was in my mid-20s. I used to build suicide prevention charities in the outback, and I had to go and present to blue-collar farming towns, and I had to go to places like Wadeye, Ceduna, and present to the locals. And if I didn't have an exciting, engaging presentation, I was going to get cans thrown at me. But what I was taught really early on, which is the best advice I ever got, is never do a presentation that you yourself wouldn't sit through.
Yeah.
And it's the same with everything in business. Don't do a website if you yourself wouldn't be impressed by it.
Yeah.
Don't, and you have to think about it sort of that way. But yeah. I think it's just very lazy.
I had a client recently excitedly tell me they had rented a property for SIL. They wanted to move into SIL. It was their first foray. And they said, look, please come and check it out, do an inspection, walk through it, let us know what you think. And I pulled up at the home, and it was a shambles outside when I got there. It had the big water stains out the front from, water stains at the front of the house as you walked in. There was the yard was a disaster. The plants were half dead. It looked like a house from, I don't even know what decade it was, but the big houses with the, I don't even know what that stuff is on the front of them, but it was just terrible. And you walked up 4 stairs to get into the house. It was a very narrow door to get through. And when I walked in, they were so excited to show me around, and the bathroom needed renovating. I haven't rented a house for a very long time, but there is no way I would rent this house. Not for me, not for anybody else. And the client of mine had his daughter with him. I think it was school holidays, and she was actually sleeping on the couch. And he was like, we were walking around trying to be quiet. And he's like, so what do you think? And I was like, how old is your daughter? And he was like, oh, she's 6 or 7 or whatever. I was like, okay, cool. Would you let her live here? And he's like, what do you mean? I said, well, in 10 years' time, when she's looking for her first house, is this where you're going to put her? And he's like, no. And I was like, why? And he's like, oh, well, and he didn't want to say it's not good enough, but that is what he meant. Obviously. And he thought about that for a minute, and he's like, you saying this house isn't good enough? And I was like, I'm saying that you probably don't want to sell a product that you wouldn't buy. And he thought about that for a while, and he did actually make quite a number of improvements to the house. But I think just that reframe of, I think the SIL homes that I've seen that have been the most aesthetically pleasing, the most not beautiful. It doesn't need to be a show home by any means.
God, no.
But the most ones that are homey are the ones that I've seen where it was originally the person's family home. So I have a wonderful client in Adelaide. Their house that they have is on 5 acres. They have tennis courts. They have basketball courts. They have this amazing kitchen. They're Italian, and they have this amazing kitchen that opens up and the whole house wraps around it. And they do cooking classes there for the community. And this was their first family home. And their son has an intellectual disability. He's about 25. They started group programs in this home, so their son would have other people to hang out with. That's why they started their business. And in that house, their son does actually live there. He now doesn't live at home at his place of residence. And it's not no longer their family home. They have another family home, but they use it as a group programs, and they do respite there. And when you walk in, you can feel it. It is a happy home. It is somewhere you would want to be. I was lucky enough for them to make me a beautiful lunch there and spend the afternoon once. And walking in, you could see how happy the other participants were, how they felt, the environment, how important that was. And literally, they would have their son there. They made this house for their son. And because it was at the quality for their son, they have a wait list, a huge wait list to come to their day programs and their respite services. And what sets them apart is the home feeling. And it's not, they don't have fancy furniture, and it's not, amazingly beautiful, but it is that sense of what someone else can call home and that they're proud of. And so I don't think they need to do branding as such, but all you would need to do to show off that place is to, be able to show that sense of community that they have and then express that.
Oh, for sure. One of my favorite expressions is that myself and customers in general, they see better than they hear.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I've heard you talk a lot about starting with the why and not the what. Can you walk us through what that means for SIL providers?
So I think, again, the most important part of any part of advertising is them. And so this is a really high stakes decision for whoever is for the chooser or the user, and they are desperate to trust you. That's all they want, more than anything. Is, can I trust this person first and foremost? And then the decision-making process sort of goes from there. And if they don't know a thing about you and why you do it, you've made it borderline impossible for them to trust you.
Yeah.
People are not as impressed by slick as people think, and they're not as impressed by just promises as much as they are about why you do this and who it is. I don't need to know the why of the person who picks up my garbage. I don't need to know the why, of certain people. But if I'm making this kind of decision, I want to know damn well why they're doing it. And, people are, to some extent, everyone's irrational, and people will always choose a more powerful why over a slightly better what anytime, because it just resonates deeper. Like, if you had to choose between two professionals and one has a better why than the other, one that makes you feel better, you're just going to trust them more, and you're just going to lean more in that direction.
And is this more important in NDIS because we don't have the differentiator in price, that everyone's paying the same?
Yeah, absolutely right. But what's great about it is that your why, which forms part of your brand, is that is actually one of the few ways you absolutely can compete with the massive bodies, the massive NDIS providers, because you only get one brand, and so do they. And anyone can tell a great story. Anyone can have a passionate, inspiring, engaging, interesting why. It's easier to have it if you're smaller, because it's typically the founder, owner, director. It coming straight from it. A lot of the bigger ones, they're century old. It's harder for them to have it.
Yeah.
And they've got all that history. It's one of the ways you absolutely can compete.
Do you think that that's changed in recent times? Because I feel like providers feel like they have to act older, bigger, slicker than they are, that they have to almost, like, I see things like hiring virtual officers and getting 1-300 numbers. And I know there's a place for that as you need it, but I'm talking about someone who started their business 6 months ago and is getting 5 phone calls. They certainly don't need a 1-300 number yet, but they feel like that is a message to the market that they're bigger, and by being bigger, they're stronger, they're more reliable. Do you think that is misguided, and do you think that has changed over time, or do you think that it's a trade-off?
Or look, I think it comes to the decision making behind it. If you're doing it because you have such a great brand and you're so exciting that you just have all these people lining up and you need these processes, that's great. If you think it's what's missing in your mix because you're not getting the interest you want, and you're like, you know what, if we had a 1,300 number, then we'd get way more inquiries, I think you're in trouble. You know, you have to start with that sort of why piece and a really clear understanding on who and what you are and processes that follow from that. Because, you know, you can absolutely automate too much and you can be too slick.
Yeah.
Especially if it doesn't gel right with how you're positioning yourself in the market. If you decide, you know what, I want to be small, I want to stay small, I just want to have 1 or 2 homes for it to feel really local, really community based, having all that automated 1,300 bullshit is probably not going to, you know, go well with that. And it's hard to go backwards from that as well. So think of it as bases. Instead of, before you go for second base, go to first. First base is always understanding who and what you are, your why, your purpose, and the rest of it. And one of the reasons why you want to do that is because it actually informs your strategy. Because it helps you think about what would this business, how would this business actually do that? Is it through these processes or not? And you work backwards.
So as you've been talking, I've been thinking about the concept of what is a brand. And I know you've already said it's not a logo and a color, that it's about what you do. But for me, that feels less like brand and more like vision, mission, purpose, what you're talking about, your why. Obviously, that comes out in your brand. But I often hear and get feedback that branding is for big companies. Talk me through what is brand, the importance of brand, and more specifically, why a smaller NDIS provider would even consider brand as the first base.
Sure. So a brand at its very core form, it's basically your identity, right? Which is formed by your why, your what, the how, the rest of it. But brand elements, things like logo and name and colors, they're called brand elements, and that's basically how that identity expresses itself. And how you express yourself can have a really meaningful impact on people's view of you and their decision making as well. Like if you have a brand that is consistent, it looks the same, it sounds the same, it's clear, it's well articulated, that helps people feel a bit more trustworthy and trust you a bit more. And it adds into that. If you've got a brand that is chaotic and makes no sense, it's just random shit thrown together, people have a hard time identifying or understanding your identity. And then that trust process is sort of disrupted. So what you really want to do is, once you understand who you are, you then want to understand how we communicate that and express that. And you do that through design elements. And graphic design is essentially how we communicate without words. You know what I mean? Or how do we communicate visually? And in an industry and in a market where a lot of people with disabilities, they may not have the strongest form of literacy, having colours and logos, these things can be really powerful to people who aren't able to read, because they can still identify, they know the colour. So an example is, I've got a client on the spectrum that I train at Anytime Fitness, and they don't know Anytime from a bar of soap, but they know purple. And they only go to purple gyms. And that's it. You know, there were people who couldn't read, but they knew what the WeFlex logo mark was, the green thing. And that really mattered to them and resonated with them. So these are additional ways that you can really engage and communicate. But, you know, massive brands big companies spend a lot of money on branding for a reason. It's because they know that it works.
So at what stage in a business should an NDIS provider be thinking about their brand?
Day one. And so as someone who started himself, I spent way too much. I spent like almost a third of my initial tiny little budget at WeFlex on branding. And one of the reasons why it was one of the best investments I ever made. So if your branding is really good, all the money you do spend on marketing goes further. Because to get 100 people to look at your website, it costs the same no matter how good your website is. But if your website's great and consistent and beautiful and it makes sense, then you're going to get better value from those 100 people. So sharpening the axe and marketing, you know, the chopping part. So you want to sharpen the axe. But it also, as a business owner, it actually is a really helpful way to guide you in, you know, starting a business is hard, especially SIL, and then the NDIS. It's exhausting. You can sort of float in and out with wanting to do it anymore because it can be very stressful. And you're constantly working stuff out. and you can feel quite lost. And one thing that a really strong brand can have, especially if it's linked to your why and your purpose and the rest of it, it can actually help you make decisions. It can actually give you a bit more pride in what you're doing, and it can help you guide you as to, would our business actually do this? How would our business respond to this when you actually know what it looks like? And your business is not just the services, it's much more than that. And so it's a really helpful guiding principle. And so for us at WeFlex, there were so many decisions that would have been complicated, but they weren't at all, because we knew damn well who we were, what we're about, and why we do it. And we can make decisions immediately. If we were really passionate about authenticity, we couldn't have stock images, which became a principle. And what happened is that we ended up actually, I was bitching about it at an advertising conference. An awesome creative agency reached out and said, oh, we'll do it for you. We did a full thing, like, for free, which was awesome. We got all these new images. And then every year we ran a new photo shoot for authentic, real people doing these photos. And it became part of our brand.
I still see you in all those photos. A bit blurred out though.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Lots of time when I'm talking to brand new NDIS providers, which is a lot of my life, they don't know who they are and they don't know what they stand for. How do you take a provider through that journey of deciding that before they can move on to things like brand elements or assets?
Oh, for sure. So, there's a process you go through, but obviously you don't start an NDIS business by accident. So they're there for a reason. And everything they need is there. It's about drawing it out. And that's a facilitation and a workshop, right? And so what we do is we sit down and we just talk about, we just throw everything at the whiteboard, and it's like, so tell us about why you're doing this. And then we can whittle that down until it's quite clear, because there's why they think they're doing it. And then you can probe, dig deeper and dig deeper. And then you sort of get to that point where it's like, that's clearly what your why is. What's your real ambition for this place? And then what they think it is. And then when you challenge it, tease it, whatever, you get to realize what that all really is. And then you can form an archetype, which is the brand archetype, which is sort of like, a way to structure your brand as a person. And then that actually can then flow on a little bit. Like, yeah, you know what, that is my personality. That is how I see it happening. And then we start to construct that brand. We extract it from the founder, but it has to be its own thing. Especially because, it's not about you. It's a brand. The brand isn't for you. The brand is for your customers. And so it's about, what do they want to see?
Yeah. That's very interesting. What do you see as some challenges when you're working through building a brand?
It takes, from a founder perspective and a business owner perspective, it does take a little bit of vulnerability to start with. And starting a business, it doesn't matter what it is, NDIS especially, but any business, it's a weirdly personal journey. You know what I mean? Like, it's weird how, personally offended or upset you get over things that are clearly a business thing.
Yeah.
But you can't help but get it in the feels. And so, it is, people can be, because it's so personal, people can be very defensive. They can be very stubborn. They can be very self-centered in it and not think about, but this isn't about you. It's about that. And we'll keep the essence of you in it. You know what I mean? Because it is going to be you running it. But this is actually for customers. And this also is something that other people are going to pick up and run, hopefully. Hopefully it gets to a point where you're barely doing anything. And you have to be able to let go of that as well. And having a clear brand can help you with that. But it's hard to extract from people. And you have to come in willing. And you also have to be committed to the process. A lot of people see it as wank. I get it. I did once upon a time as well. But, only going through a massive branding journey myself have I really understood the magic of it and would encourage it. And so for a lot of people, it's about not just willing to make the investment of money, but it's also the investment of time, the emotion, the investment of energy and emotions as well. But it's one of the best investments you can make off the bat, for sure.
So what would your number one tip or hack or advice be to a SIL provider considering thinking about their brand for the first time?
Go on your own website, look at your own socials, pretend you're a customer, ask other people who haven't really engaged in your business before to be brutal and give you a real score. count the number of times you use non-descriptive, words like high quality, vacancy, and ask them, okay, if my brand was a person, what kind of person would it be? Like, really interrogate your brand, and you realize that it's actually not that strong. And then again, like we said earlier, why would a mum or anybody with a few $100,000 in their plan looking for SIL choose you? Why would that happen? What makes you so deserving that you don't have to put in the effort to get that or to impress them? And then decide if that's what you want to be or not.
That's wonderful. Anything else you think we should cover today?
Do I look cool?
You always look cool.
No.
Is that your brand?
I think, I don't know. I guess to all the SIL providers out there that are maybe in the earlier days and are on the fence about this type of thing, I totally get it. The last thing you want is unnecessary expense. My advice would be that it's actually necessary. You're in a highly competitive landscape. There are a few things you can compete on, but branding and vision is one thing you absolutely can compete with. And, to some extent, you can't buy a good story, or anyone can buy it. So there are so many ways you can compete with the mega providers, with your branding, with creativity, with authenticity, And I think personally, my view of it is that people would much rather use a smaller SIL provider, I think. I think that they're nervous about the institutional feel of the mega providers.
Yeah.
So they want to trust you.
Yeah.
And they want to feel comfortable, and they want to believe that you're a savvy operator and you know what you're doing, whilst also being, mission and values led. But they're not, but you have to remember, they see better than they hear. If what they see is a disjointed, not well communicated, vibe of who you are, they're probably not going to choose you, and you've let them down. And the real advice is to actually, put your best self out there, and you'd be surprised how bad people want to connect and want to hand, those sort of SIL plans over to you.
And most time people are trying to connect with another person.
Yeah.
And so by you putting yourself out there and telling the story and positioning yourself, whether it's using yourself like I do in my brand, or using your brand promises and your values and your mission to communicate, people really want to connect at a human level and trust before everything else.
And that's why storytelling is so, I haven't been at WeFlex in over a year. I still get people calling me to ask me about my story or talk about the story, or I did WeFlex because of you. I did, signed up to WeFlex as a PT because of you or whatever. And it's always because of the story.
Yeah.
Which is probably something we didn't talk about. It's really quick, but storytelling is one of the greatest assets you can have in your business.
Yeah.
It's one of the best ways that you can connect, you can resonate, you can foster trust as well. And you may not think you have a great story, but every business has at least one. And it's about how you craft it, and we do that at Disbranded. And it's people always sort of at the beginning are a bit skeptical about storytelling as either a brand asset or just an activity in general, until they go through the process and they're like, actually, this makes life a lot easier. And, a provider that we both know actually did the storytelling stuff. And they're like, every conversation we have, we actually start with a little story. And now they just send me emails showing the positive feedback they're getting. And they're like, we really underestimated how bad this is. And it can be tough for some people because, again, I'm asking you for vulnerability, which not everybody wants to give.
Yeah.
I get that. I had to tell the story about my dad dying, about my brother's poor health, about my dysfunctional family. And it was really hard. It felt like I was commoditizing tragedy and trauma and putting it out there for a commercial gain. It's a really ugly feeling.
Yeah.
And I had to work through that. But what came out of that, though, was a really powerful story that motivated and inspired a lot of people with disabilities to go to the gym, a lot of personal trainers to become inclusive. And every time I told that story, at least every single time, without fail, regardless of the size of the audience, at least one person would come up to me afterwards and tell me their story and would connect with me on a really deep human level.
I've seen that happen. I've seen people come to you at the back of the room crying, telling you how much you have impacted them.
Yeah, and so it's just it's that authenticity piece. It's one of those things where you can't describe it, but you know it when you see it, or you know it when you feel it.
And I think it's that part of just being human, because Tommy, you are so cool that people think that there's nothing that has ever happened in your life that could have impacted you, because you're successful, you emulate success and achievement, and you've done these cool things, and people just assume that people who've done cool things were born with silver spoons in their mouth. But by you telling your story and being open and vulnerable, they can then relate to that, because they can't relate to someone born with a silver spoon in their mouth, but they can relate to the trauma that they've had, and then that makes you more relatable, more trustworthy, more like them, and we all want to work with people like us.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why I like you. It's your trauma and your dysfunction.
But I used to start a lot of meetings with, just off the bat, I'm the last person in the world that would have, should have, or could have started a business, but I did it anyway, and I'm failing upwards. And a lot of people were like, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, and I'm like, I'm still working this out as I go. So I'm at a point now where I've never been good at putting on airs anyway. I've always been, I don't have the energy to have more than one version of me out there. So I just kind of just speak my mind and just authentic as best I can. But it has absolutely been, I'm always surprised and overwhelmed by how positive it's received. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, you have to have unencouraged people would have the courage to just put themselves out there in all their glory, communicate clearly. And obviously, if you've got the skills for storytelling, you can do it in a way that's just going to foster devotion, love, admiration, trust, the rest of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's great. Thank you so much for joining me today, Tommy. Always a pleasure to catch up with you, and even more special for being here on SILosophy today.
Thank you, Tania Gomez. Pleasure's all mine.
That's a wrap on this episode of SILosophy. If this resonated with you, take a second to subscribe and share it with someone in the SIL space who really needs to hear this. Don't forget to connect with Tania Gomez Consulting on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook for more resources, conversations, and support to help you grow your impact. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep making a difference.